Ethan Ward hated Mondays. But, truth be told, he hated every day equally, especially now that the world outside had turned into a gray blur of indistinguishable faces, meaningless errands, and the all-consuming glow of his computer screen. It wasn't so much that his life had fallen apart, it was more that it had never quite been put together. The dull apartment he lived in, a cramped one-bedroom with chipped paint and creaky floors, was a reflection of the dullness inside him. The window offered a view of nothing more than an endless street of concrete, towering buildings that blocked the sun, and pedestrians who walked in rhythm with the invisible weight of their own invisible routines. That he wasn't a loser, or at least, that's what he told himself. But he was one of those people who would wander through life as if in a half-dream, always on the edge of something, but never quite there. No real friends to speak of. No family that reached out. And a job that wasn't worth describing, but Ethan had found something in the virtual world that made all of that feel bearable. Nexus wasn't just a game. It was an escape, a sanctuary. A place where everything was perfect, tailored to fit his desires. It wasn't just the ultra-realistic graphics or the endless possibilities of exploration. It was more profound than that. Within Nexus, Ethan had power. Power over the environment, power over people, power over reality itself. At first, it was an outlet, a brief respite from the crushing weight of his ordinary life. But soon, it became an obsession, a place he didn't want to leave. Every waking moment, he found himself plugged into the virtual world. His body would be slouched in front of a screen, but his mind, his true self, was elsewhere. He never questioned why he gravitated toward Nexus in the way that he did. It felt natural, like the world was finally giving him something he could control. In Nexus, he could be anyone. He could be a warrior, a wizard, a king, or even a thief. He could escape. And more importantly, he could forget. Forget about the city, forget about the smallness of his life, forget about the fact that he was slowly turning into a stranger in his own skin. But one afternoon, after an exhausting session of exploration quests that spanned several hours, something unexpected happened. Ethan was drifting through a lush forest in the game, its trees towering like giants, their leaves shifting colors with each breath of wind. The air was crisp, the sounds of the forest, a cacophony of distant birds and rustling foliage, felt almost real. He was on autopilot, moving from one quest to the next, when he saw it. A wall. At first, it was so faint he thought his eyes were playing tricks. The area in front of him shimmered, the landscape itself warping. It wasn't a visual glitch, he knew what that looked like, but something wrong. Like a veil that wasn't supposed to be there. Ethan had wandered through Nexus for weeks, months even, without ever encountering a barrier like this. His curiosity piqued, he moved closer to it. He was prepared for the usual error message, the pop-up that would tell him he had reached an invisible boundary, something meant to keep him from exploring beyond the designated parameters. But when his avatar touched it, the world around him changed in a way he couldn't understand. The trees flickered out of existence, like an old film reel being fast-forwarded. The ground beneath his feet trembled. The sky above shattered like glass. Ethan stepped back, blinking rapidly. The entire forest was gone, replaced by a shifting, chaotic void. Colors he didn't know existed, flashed in and out of sight. For a moment, he felt weightless, as though gravity itself had stopped working. The sensation was like being underwater but without the water. A suffocating, dizzying pressure building in his chest. His heart thudded loudly in his ears, faster and faster, and then, just as quickly as it had happened, everything snapped back to normal. The trees returned. The sky fixed itself. The landscape was unchanged, pristine, and familiar once again. Ethan stood there, his breath coming in shallow gasps. He could feel his palms sweaty against the VR gloves, his fingers trembling. What the hell, he muttered aloud, pulling off the headset and leaning back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. The room was still his small apartment. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound, accompanied by the distant roar of traffic outside. He looked at the screen in front of him, the familiar Nexus menu open and waiting. Nothing had changed, but something had shifted inside of him. For the next few days, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about that strange occurrence. His mind kept returning to the invisible wall he had touched in the game. It wasn't a glitch, not exactly. There was no error message, no code fault. It was like the virtual world had, for just a brief moment, shown him something beyond itself. Something other, and he needed to know what that something was. He went back into Nexus, retracing his steps to the spot where it had happened. The forest was still there, peaceful and calm as ever. This time, Ethan moved with a purpose. He walked along the familiar path, avoiding the usual distractions, until he reached the spot where the wall had appeared. He reached out, expecting the same sudden shift of reality. His avatar's hand brushed the air. Nothing happened. Frustrated, he walked further, looking for any sign of that strange breach in the fabric of the world. And then he saw it again, the shimmer. The faintest flicker at the edge of his vision. This time, he didn't hesitate. He stepped toward it, his heart beating louder in his chest, and this time, when he touched the wall, the world didn't snap back. It collapsed, the landscape folded inward like a sheet of paper crumpling in his hands. The sky bled into a swirling, kaleidoscopic pattern of shapes and colors, none of which made sense. Gravity shifted, his feet felt weightless. Time bent. There were no more familiar markers. No more sound. No more logic. Ethan had crossed the boundary. His consciousness, once tethered to the physical world, now hovered in a void. He wasn't sure if he was still in the game, if he had somehow fallen asleep in his chair, or if he had crossed into something far deeper than either of those things. A voice, soft, almost a whisper, sounded behind him, though there was no one there. Are you ready? Ethan turned, but there was no one. Only the shifting, strange landscape that had taken over everything. The air around him shimmered, vibrating as if the very molecules of the world were alive. He didn't know what was happening, but he felt it in his bones. This was not Nexus. This was something else entirely. The words lingered in his mind. Are you ready? He had no idea what that meant. But, somehow, a part of him knew. Knew that this was his choice. This moment, this decision. Would he cross over into the unknown, or would he turn back? He could feel the weight of it all. The potential. The power. But before he could think any further, the world around him began to pulse, as if breathing. The shifting lights and strange landscapes seemed to beckon him forward. Ethan didn't know it yet, but his life was about to change in ways he couldn't possibly understand. Ethan stood motionless, his heart racing, staring into the swirling, kaleidoscopic void. The strange voice that had whispered to him was gone, but its words still reverberated in his mind. Are you ready? Ready for what? For where? He felt a cold shiver run down his spine as the ground, if it could still be called ground, continued to shift beneath his feet. The very fabric of this place seemed unstable, like it could fracture at any moment. But there was something intoxicating about it, something that pulled him forward. He stepped into the vortex of light and color. The world bent around him in ways that defied logic. Gravity felt like a suggestion, and up was no longer a fixed direction. He floated through the strange space, his limbs weightless, disoriented, yet curiously calm. A subtle hum echoed in the background, like the low vibration of an otherworldly engine, as if the entire dimension were powered by a force he couldn't comprehend. Each movement felt surreal, detached from any physical sense he had ever known. But what struck him most were the flashes of images, memories, and emotions, his own, yet not quite. For a moment, he thought he saw his childhood home, the small house in the suburbs with the faded white picket fence and the overgrown garden his mother could never keep up with. Then it shifted, and he was standing on a crowded subway platform, late for work, feeling the sharp jolt of panic as the train doors closed without him. Another flash, and he saw himself at his computer, alone in his apartment, looking at the Nexus login screen. Then the image twisted into something darker, his face, older, gaunt, eyes hollow, sitting in that very same apartment, staring blankly at the screen as if it had devoured him whole. The images faded as quickly as they had come, and Ethan's feet, if they could still be called feet, touched something solid. He blinked, his vision swimming, and realized he was no longer floating in the chaotic void. The environment around him had shifted again. Now, he stood in a vast, open space. The sky above him was a shade of purple that no natural sky had ever been, and the ground was made of a smooth, translucent material that seemed to pulse with energy. Strange structures rose in the distance, angular and geometric, like something out of a dream. There were no stars, no sun, no recognizable sources of light. The entire place felt as if it were suspended in a state of suspension, untethered from any laws of physics or time. The air, if it could be called air, felt thick and heavy with possibility. Ethan took a tentative step forward, his breath shallow. His eyes scanned the strange, alien landscape. The more he looked, the more he realized that nothing in this world made sense. There were no boundaries, no horizon, just endless, ever-shifting shapes and forms that seemed to defy the rules of nature. There were structures, monolithic, angular, looming in the distance, their surfaces alive with shifting patterns. And there were creatures too, figures that flickered at the edges of his vision, almost like shadows, but they seemed to be made of light. He couldn't look directly at them, they were always just beyond his peripheral vision, never fully in focus. Welcome. The voice came again, this time clearer, sharper, resonating through the air. It wasn't the same whispering voice from before, it was distinct, almost authoritative, and strangely familiar. Ethan whipped around, searching for the source. But there was no one. Who's there? His voice sounded hollow in the strange space, as if it were absorbed by the very air around him. He felt small, insignificant, but at the same time, something about this place made him feel more alive than he ever had. The voice echoed again, this time closer. You've crossed the threshold, Ethan. And now, you must choose. He froze. The voice knew his name. His real name, not his avatar's. Choose, he asked, his voice trembling slightly, between staying here, in this world, or returning to where you came from. The voice continued, as if explaining something simple. The choice is yours. But once made, there is no going back. The weight of those words settled over him. His mind raced. What did it mean to stay here? What would happen if he chose to leave? But more pressing was the question, where exactly was here? He had no frame of reference, no anchor to his reality. I don't understand, Ethan said, though part of him already suspected that understanding didn't matter here. The boundary you crossed, the one you touched, was not a glitch, the voice explained. It was a threshold. You are now standing at the edge of your own consciousness. A place beyond the limits of your mind, a place where the rules of your world no longer apply. Ethan's breath caught. This was no longer Nexus. He had crossed beyond something even that perfect simulation could not touch. A new dimension, a new reality, or something else entirely. I'm dreaming, he muttered, unsure if he was asking the question or making a statement. No, the voice replied. You are beyond dreams. Beyond the physical world. You are standing at the edge of awareness itself. Ethan felt his chest tighten. It was too much. His mind couldn't process this. He took a step back, trying to make sense of the space around him, but every step only led him deeper into confusion. What did it mean to stand at the edge of awareness? Was this all in his head? Was he still in Nexus, or had he slipped into something far more dangerous? The world you've known, the voice continued, is a construct. A limitation. A cage. Here, in this space, there are no limitations. No boundaries. No walls. You can reshape this place. You can make it what you want. Ethan turned toward the voice, still searching for its source. But what's the catch? He demanded. There's always a catch. Nothing's free. There is a price, the voice said, almost as if it had been waiting for him to ask. The price is your connection to the world you know. If you stay here, you will become part of this dimension, part of this new reality. But your past, your memories, everything you were, it will fade away. A chill ran down his spine, or, the voice continued, you can return. But you will lose what you've found here. The power to shape reality. The freedom to bend the laws of existence. The chance to truly be free. Ethan felt a pang in his chest. The idea of leaving this place, this boundless, strange realm, felt impossible now. It was like a dream he didn't want to wake up from. But there was something else, something he couldn't quite grasp. The world he'd come from, Nexus, his real life, wasn't real. Not truly. It was a simulation. A glorified prison. A distraction, and yet, the thought of choosing this new world, it felt too dangerous. Too final. The implications of leaving everything behind were too enormous. He wasn't ready to give up everything he'd known, even if it was imperfect. The voice spoke again, softer now. The choice, Ethan, is not about what you want. It is about who you are. The only question you must answer is this: will you remain bound by the limits of what you know, or will you embrace the unknown? His heart raced as he stood there, suspended in that moment. 1,000 thoughts churned in his mind, all contradictory, all impossible to reconcile. He had spent so long running away from reality, from the mundanity of his life, from his own inadequacies. But what if this place, this reality, was just another form of escape? What if it was just another cage in disguise? He didn't know what the right choice was. He wasn't even sure what the choice meant. But the weight of the decision pressed down on him like an anchor. He could feel the gravity of it, pulling him toward an unknown future. Take your time, the voice said, sensing his hesitation. But know this: time here is not the same as time in the world you left behind. Every moment you delay brings you closer to a point of no return. Choose, and you will know what comes next. Stay, and you will reshape everything. Leave, and you will be trapped forever. The choice is yours. Ethan closed his eyes. He could feel the tension building inside him, the strange pull of the world around him, calling him to cross into the unknown. But deep down, something held him back. Something whispered that he wasn't ready. Not yet, but as the world pulsed around him, as the strange light flickered at the edges of his vision, Ethan knew that whatever he decided, nothing would ever be the same again. Ethan's mind swirled with uncertainty as he stood at the precipice of his decision. The weight of the voice's words, of the gravity of this place, pressed down on him with a suffocating force. He could feel it, the pulse of the dimension around him, the vibrations that hummed through the air like a heartbeat. Each thrum seemed to match the rhythm of his own pulse, as though he were inextricably linked to this place, to whatever it was. He didn't know how long he stood there, caught between the pull of this new reality and the familiar, half-broken world he had left behind. The options were clear, but the consequences were unknowable. Stay and reshape the world, the voice had said. Leave and return to your old life. What did either of those choices really mean? Could he even go back? And if he did, would it matter? Would he be the same person when he returned to Nexus, to his lonely apartment, to his crumbling sense of self? His fingers twitched, as if on their own accord, reaching out toward the landscape. The translucent ground beneath his feet shimmered with light, ripples spreading out in waves as his hand grazed it. There was something intoxicating about the thought of reshaping this world. The idea of bending it to his will, of becoming the master of it all, was a lure he could scarcely resist. But in the back of his mind, there was a gnawing feeling, a flicker of doubt, that told him something was wrong. Something wasn't right about this place, about this choice. It was too easy. Maybe that was the trick. Maybe that's what it meant to cross over into a new dimension, to reach the other side of consciousness, only to find that what you thought was freedom was nothing more than another cage, a gilded one. What if the cost of choosing this dimension wasn't just his memories, but his very essence? What if everything he became here was simply another illusion, a game of his own mind? The idea made him shiver, though the temperature of the place remained constant. The air around him was warm, but there was an edge to it, like the warmth of a sun that had never set, never known night. There was no way to tell if it was day or night here, if time even existed. But what if I could make something real? The thought flitted through his mind like a ghost, teasing him with possibility. What if he could forge something that didn't just live in the virtual world, but something real? Something that could break free from the confines of the human experience, of digital escapism, of a life that never truly felt like it belonged to him. Ethan closed his eyes, his fingers curling into fists at his sides. He didn't want to think anymore. He didn't want to make a decision. The weight of it all was too much to bear. And yet, somehow, he knew he couldn't stay here, lost in this space, forever. He had to make a choice. "You're still here," the voice said, a trace of something like amusement in its tone. Ethan spun, his eyes darting around, searching for the source. But there was no figure, no form to speak of. Just the endless, shifting world around him. The voice was everywhere, woven into the very fabric of this dimension. "Yeah, I'm still here," Ethan muttered, the words almost slipping out before he could stop them. "And I don't know what the hell I'm supposed to do." "You already know what you must do," the voice said gently, almost as if it were guiding him, coaxing him like a parent urging a child to take their first step. "You just haven't accepted it yet." "What if I don't want to make a choice?" Ethan asked, more to himself than to the voice. His chest tightened as the question left his lips. What if I just stay here, suspended forever in this place? The thought was tempting. There was no fear here. There was no pain. No regrets. No memories. Just endless potential. "Then you will lose it all," the voice replied, its tone no longer soft but insistent, tinged with a warning that made Ethan shiver. "If you do not choose, you will fade. This place will consume you, as it consumes all who hesitate. And once you are consumed, you will be lost forever." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. He felt the weight of them, as though the very space around him was tightening, squeezing the air from his lungs. Fading. Lost forever. He couldn't let that happen. He couldn't. But was he ready to leave everything behind, to step back into the life he had once known? The life that had always felt like a simulation, like a half-lived thing. Suddenly, without warning, the landscape around him began to change again. The ground under his feet shifted, a ripple passing through it like the effect of a stone tossed into a pond. The distant, angular structures seemed to warp and bend, growing taller, more menacing. The once fluid sky began to pulse with erratic bursts of light, casting shadows that twisted unnaturally. Ethan's heart raced as the ground beneath him seemed to ripple like the surface of water disturbed by a violent force. It was as if the very dimension was reacting to his indecision. He stumbled, his balance shifting as he tried to regain his footing. A surge of panic crawled up his spine. It was happening, the thing the voice had warned him about. The space was collapsing in on itself, becoming less stable with each passing second. If he didn't make his choice, he would be consumed by the chaos. He could feel it now, deep in his chest, a tremor of uncertainty that rippled outward like a stone skipping across water. "Make the choice," the voice urged, its tone now tinged with urgency. "Time is slipping away." Ethan swallowed hard, his mind racing. He thought of his apartment, of the drab, suffocating reality that had always made him feel small. He thought of Nexus, the game that had become his life, the place where he could escape and feel like someone who mattered. He thought of the emptiness that had always followed him in both worlds, the ache of being someone who had no place, no purpose. But here, in this strange dimension, he had the potential to be something more. He could leave all of it behind, the limitations, the expectations, and be something else entirely. A sense of clarity cut through the fog of confusion. He didn't need to go back. He didn't need to stay stuck in a world that didn't truly fit him. He was ready to embrace something new, something boundless. He would make this place his own. He would choose this dimension, this new existence, and let go of the past. Okay, he whispered, his voice hoarse. I choose. I choose to stay. As soon as the words left his lips, the dimension around him seemed to settle. The chaotic distortion that had threatened to consume him receded, like a storm passing. The sky above him shifted into a steady, deep shade of blue, and the ground beneath his feet became solid once more. The pulsing energy that had hummed in the air seemed to calm, as if recognizing his choice. Then it is done, the voice said softly, the finality of its words settling into Ethan's bones. You have chosen your path. Welcome. Ethan looked around, taking in the strange, alien world that now stretched out before him. This place was his now. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he truly belonged. But even as the new world began to take shape around him, his reality, his rules, his creation, there was a lingering thought at the back of his mind. He had chosen this. But was it truly freedom? Or had he merely traded one cage for another? The answer was still uncertain, but for now, Ethan didn't care. He had crossed the threshold. He had shaped his own destiny. And whatever lay ahead, he was ready to face it. No boundaries. No limits. Just endless possibility. And as he stood there, bathed in the soft, unbroken light of this new world, he realized that the only real limit was the one he placed on himself.